To fully understand the Black experience in America, people from Detroit will tell you, look no further than this city. The story of Detroit simultaneously involves Black elevation and suppression. Detroit, Michigan, long known as a predominantly Black city and well known as a place where crime is rampant. The socioeconomic issues so widespread, the city itself declared bankruptcy in 2013. The rise and decline of the auto industry has left its imprint on this place. Geographically, Detroit sits in the Midwest, along the border the United States shares with Canada. In the years before the Civil War, that geography was a vital part of the Underground Railroad, helping Black people escape slavery in the South and cross the northern border. During World War I and World War II, demands in the auto industry brought many Black Americans to the city. They were looking for work, and they came to find opportunities and more freedom than they had in southern states. During the Civil Rights Movement in Detroit, a great push for change, in unity with the calls for liberation across the nation. It is the birthplace of Motown. Historically, there is no shortage of examples of Black excellence. But despite that, Detroit, Michigan has for decades been burdened with heavy racial division. It is a city where the current conversation around race in America has deep roots.
Obviously, living in Detroit, you get both sides. You get people who don't like you, people who like you, or tell you you're too white, you're too Black.
Jasmine Shakur says growing up biracial in Detroit makes her hyper aware of the racial lines she knows were drawn long before she was born.
My grandma, she told me that she was still with the segregated bathrooms.
In Detroit, the days of hard segregation were slowly dismantled as northern and midwestern cities became places of refuge during what is known in American history as the Great Migration. Detroit was among the cities where Black Americans found freedom from the Jim Crow South and opportunities for work.
My father arrived in Detroit from Houston, Texas when he was 14 years old.
What have you guys missed?
Detroit's current deputy mayor, Conrad Mallett, traces his roots to that time.
Like Black Americans, brown Americans from across the diaspora, they were coming to Detroit for a better life.
His father, though, would work in law enforcement, later become a teacher and activist, and get involved in local politics. His mother was an activist who worked in education.
When Martin Luther King came to Detroit and delivered the I Have a Dream speech here first, in order to support the speech that he was giving at Cobo Hall, my mother and father, two Detroit public school teachers, mortgaged their house in order to secure the deposit to pay for Cobo Hall. Got paid for by tickets, but that was the kind of risk that they took.
On the national stage, the voice of Dr. King was loud as the civil rights movement raged. And it was in the years shortly after that Detroit got its first Black mayor. He ended up serving 2 decades, spanning between the 70s and the 90s.
My father worked under Coleman Young.
In the early days of his administration, Mayor Coleman Young took on the harsh police treatment of Black Americans in his city and put forth the voices of the majority Black population. His statue still stands outside City Hall today. History professor Kinfinse Chike lectures at Wayne University in Detroit. He focuses on Black history.
A lot of the things he did helped to engender things that contributed to a healthy racial self-esteem, because we began to see more Black people in different positions of power. The downside of that was a time when Detroit was considered unsafe, when maybe the murder rates were high and things like that.
There's no denying under Coleman Young the Black voice was amplified, but racial lines were further drawn, many say, under his leadership.
When our first African-American mayor, Coleman Young, was elected in 1974, suddenly we became this very dangerous melting pot of a place.
Jonathan Jones is an educator and outreach coordinator at Detroit's Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History.
We live in a very divisive area. Even if you talk to people from across the country, even across the world, Detroit has been known as a dangerous place.
Detroit's economic issues are well known, as are its crime statistics. Jones believes race drives a lot of those narratives.
We've been associating danger with black since the inception of this country.
It's a conversation recently ignited across the country by the Black Lives Matter movement, a movement that followed the death of George Floyd and that deeply affected those who have heard and witnessed the same calls for change before.
It exhausted me. I wanted to be further than we were. I wanted desperately for the world that I was leaving my children to be better than it is.
Detroit's deputy mayor was a child himself when the race riots broke out in this city. He says so much more needs to change still.
Even today, the possibility of having an inappropriate interaction with the police remains a paramount part of any black or brown man's experience, no matter where they are in America, no matter their status, be they the deputy mayor or the deputy dog catcher.
A powerful observation on the reality of racial division. Racial divide infamously exemplified in Detroit by what was a wall, a division between black people who lived south of it close to the urban core and white people who moved north out of the city to suburbs. That wall was later mostly torn down and came to be known as the 8 Mile Line.
Today, the 8 Mile Line is more of a psychological boundary than the hard boundary it once was. The separation between black and white still exists, though, north to south.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, a racial breakdown in 2019 shows Detroit's population at almost 80% black. That same year, almost 30% of African Americans in Detroit lived under the poverty line.
In order to truly understand the racial division in Detroit, you need to know about the generations of poverty and crime that exists in neighborhoods like this one.
In Detroit's poorest neighborhoods, crime rates are largely connected to poverty.
I was living here in the community house. I just moved out.
And this man says race is a common factor too.
You don't know what poverty is until you realize what wealth is.
Gangs started to prevail in the 70s as opportunities for black people went from robust to few and far between, says Yusef Bunchi Shakur. Formerly incarcerated, he turned his life around. Now he's a community activist. He has studied the impacts of race and racism in Detroit and lived its effects. He knows the streets well.
It sucked me into the point of the gang aspect of it. My father had abandoned my mother, found himself what I call a lost soul, searching for his humanity on street corners, which ultimately led him to go to prison. And I would end up following him to prison. He went to prison when I was 10. I would end up going to prison at the age of 19 for a crime I didn't do.
He says the cycles of poverty and crime that once plagued his life have affected so many around him. He runs a nonprofit now to help those he was once just like.
The poverty that we confront here is systemic.
A decline in opportunities for African Americans can be largely traced to the rise and fall of the auto industry in Detroit.
When the automobile industry moved offshore, the displacement across many communities was profound and immediate, but there was nothing as dramatic as what occurred in Detroit.
Experts have long said Detroit is the most racially divided city in the nation. People born and raised here tell stories that contribute to the collective experience of being black in America.
The relevance is the possibility, I think, that some results may emerge out of the dialogue.
The possibility.
That's why it's very key. That's the operative word, possibility. The annoyance is this is not anything new. And in the past times that we've been at this place or somewhere similar, we've never got to that point that one may hope that change would come.
As a national dialogue rages on, it's clear their voices illuminate truths far beyond this city.
Change in America for black and brown people is always going to be hard. It's always going to be incremental. It's not going to be without sacrifice, and it's not going to be automatic. And those were clearly the lessons that I was taught at a very, very early age.
When you look at the history of African Americans, themes including oppression, resilience, excellence, trauma, pain, and passion stand out. These are very much the themes that paint the lives of Black Americans in Detroit, a city that can truly serve as a teaching point when it comes to understanding racism in this country. Reporting in Detroit, I'm Stephanie Bertini for BNC.